Hello, I'm Oksana Kukurudza. This is number 0759, the Stuff File Program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File Program, number 0759. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File Program, Raymond Benson was the first American to write an original James Bond novel. He wrote 6 of them, and now they are all about to be re-released in an omnibus edition for the Kindle called James Bond, The Raymond Benson Years. How did the folks at Ian Fleming Publications first come to offer him the job back in the day?
They knew I knew the Bond character and, the existing books inside and out. And they had seen that I had been writing fiction in the computer gaming world, writing complicated, fantastical plots and dialogue and characters and doing that for many years. And I had written a first novel, which the chairman of Ian Fleming Publications had read, so he could see that I could start a novel and finish one. So I was offered the job.
Alan Hustak, author of One Long Line of Marvel, 200 Years of Montreal's St. Patrick's Parade. How did this book come to be?
This book has kind of come together through osmosis. In 2009, I was the chief reviewing officer for the parade. But long before that, I had written a history of St. Patrick's Basilica. And over the years, I was sort of surrounded with the Irish presence in Montreal. After I walked in the parade as the chief reviewing officer, I was curious, and a lot of the research that I had done on a number of other projects just came together.
Stuart Nulman is in with another edition of Book Banter.
Hi, I'm Stuart Nulman, and Book Banter goes back in time to New York City circa 1939, that's pre-World War II, with Roberta Rich's historical spy thriller, The Jazz Club Spy. Get ready for some Cafe Society cloak and dagger. It's taking place later on the Stuff File Program.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0759, was Oksana Kukurudza, author of Sunflowers Bend But Rarely Break, which is a nonfiction narrative about her Ukrainian parents and their experience in Nazi slave camps. She was a guest on show number 0743, which you can go back and listen to. And thank you very much, Oksana, for doing the guest slate on this program, number 0759. Much appreciated. The Stuff File Program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. On February 19th, neighbors in an apartment building in Poland became alarmed as a 19-year-old man tried to lead a full-grown horse up the stairs to his third-floor home. Police were called to the building and determined that the mare, worth about $3,800, had been stolen. She was returned to the owner, and the horse thief was charged with theft. He faces 5 years in prison. 5 years in prison. Well, that explains the long face. Details have recently emerged about an incident in Willow Springs, Missouri in November. The Howell County Sheriff's Office had investigated after a man in his 60s who was a paraplegic lost his feet while brush hogging. Said Lieutenant Torrey Thompson, it was a poorly executed plan. He said it was clear almost immediately that the accident had been staged. The cuts were very clean, the feet were nowhere to be found, and tourniquets had been applied to both legs. Allegedly, the victim had help from a man from Florida who cut off the feet with a hatchet to help him commit insurance fraud. However, since the unnamed man never filed the claim, and he was so severely injured, the sheriff's office declined to charge him. And the missing feet? Well, a couple of days later, police got a call that a relative found them in a bucket obscured by tires, so they went and got them. Well, that brings new meaning to tired feet. Mystery solved, although it's not like those feet could have gotten very far. In 2023, BP, formerly British Petroleum, bought out Travel Centers of America, a large truck stop company. An unnamed mergers and acquisitions manager at BP worked on the deal from her home office, and her husband overheard her phone calls talking about it. 42-year-old Tyler Loudon used the information he overheard to buy 46,450 shares of TA, hoping to, quote, make enough money so that his wife did not have to work long hours anymore, unquote. Once the deal was complete, TA shares spiked by 71%, and Loudon sold the stock at $1.76 million in profit. When investigators started sniffing around, he told his wife what he did. She was stunned and reported it to BP, moved out of their home in Houston, Texas, and divorced him. Loudon pleaded guilty to securities fraud and must repay the gains and faces a $250,000 fine plus up to 5 years in prison. Even though federal regulators and company found no evidence of wrongdoing on his wife's part, or I should say ex-wife's part, BP fired her. You know, Loudon's ex-wife did all the right things. She reported her husband, moved out, divorced him, was cleared by both the company and federal regulators, yet BP still fired her. Oh, I think she might get a windfall of her own once she contacts a lawyer.
Beyond Petroleum, BP.
And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, at an event billed as Willie's Chocolate Experience on February 24th in Glasgow, Scotland, children and parents were so underwhelmed that police were called. The event, which promised Willy Wonka-themed chocolate fountains, performances by Oompa Loompas, and optical marvels, turned out to offer just a few jelly beans and a nearly empty warehouse. Stuart Sinclair, who paid about $44 per ticket to bring his kids to the show, said it amounted to maybe 20 chairs, a couple of tables, and a half-inflated bouncy castle. Jenny Fogarty, who was hired to play an Oompa Loompa, said she was given a 15-page script the night before and that, quote, the wigs were very cheap, unquote. The organizer canceled the event on Saturday afternoon. It was unclear who had called the police. The event organizer, House of Illuminati, said ticket purchases would be refunded. You know, I've seen pictures and news items of this place. It would have been more exciting for kids to visit a place called House of Lint.
What is this, Wonka? Some kind of fun house? Why, having fun?
Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Author Raymond Benson is back on the show, and he's back because the 6 original James Bond novels that he wrote are just about to be released in one omnibus edition called James Bond, The Raymond Benson Years. He joins us via Zoom from Chicago. Hi, Raymond.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. It's nice to have you back on the program once again. You must be
I've been on a few times.
Yes, you have.
I'm a regular.
Yes, absolutely. You must be really excited that the 6 James Bond books that you wrote are coming out. And it's a pretty busy year generally for the Ian Fleming publishers.
Yeah, right. You know, last year, 2023 was the 70th anniversary of the very first Bond novel by Ian Fleming, which was Casino Royale. So, you know, the company reissued all of his books, and then they reprinted my first novel, 0-10, in a new edition in England. And they also reprinted the very first continuation novel, which was Colonel Sun, written by Kingsley Amis. And they also did John Pearson's James Bond, the authorized biography. And then, you know, we've had, Kim Sherwood is busy doing her new series of 00 agents. And Charlie Hickson did the most recent adult Bond novel, which was On His Majesty's Secret service. So yeah, that was a busy year. Now you mentioned this omnibus. It is just an ebook. It's not in print. It's
Right.
because that would be huge. That would be the size of remember phone books? There used to be a thing called phone books, and if you got like the New York City phone book, it came in 2 volumes, and they were both like 3 inches thick. So it would be like that, if it was in print. So no, for an ebook, it's great because then you can carry around on a Kindle or a Nook or whatever your device is all 6 of my books, and you can go on a long trip, and they don't weigh a ton.
Well, full disclosure, I will be purchasing the Raymond Benson Years. Even though I've already read the first novel because I really loved 0-10, but I will be buying it for my Kindle because when I first bought my Kindle, oh so many years ago, and I'm one of the biggest James Bond fans on the planet, but I had never read any of Ian Fleming's works. So when I got my Kindle, again, oh so many years ago, my first Kindle, I said I was going to read every single James Bond book in order that Ian Fleming wrote it. And I did that. By the way, the very first book I bought from my Kindle was actually Roger Moore's autobiography, My Bond Is My Word, is it?
Right, yeah, I think that's what it was.
And so that was the first book I bought on Kindle. Then I bought all of Fleming's. And then I decided to read Colonel Sun. And then I decided to read yours, 0-10, and loved it. So now I'm really looking forward to the other 5.
Oh, well, good. Of course, you skipped over John Gardner. He did a bunch in between the John Pearson book and me.
Well,
so he was the next.
To be honest, I skipped over him only because I really wanted to read Colonel Sun, and I knew you, so I figured I'd skip it. So that's why
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, reading the Fleming books in order is quite an experience because there really is an arc there. You can see the evolution of not only his writing, but of the character and how the books changed from the 1950s into the 1960s. So yeah, it's a fun experience. And you can some people can look at those and go, oh well, they're kind of dated, blah blah blah, wonk wonk. But we still read Charles Dickens. We still read Agatha Christie. We still read Raymond Chandler. We still read a lot of classic great stuff. And I would definitely put Ian Fleming in that bowl of classic great authors. And if you love spy fiction, if you love action adventure, then you got to read Ian Fleming.
Now, I know you've also written some novelizations of some of the films,
Yep.
and of course that's not included in the omnibus because it's the 6 original novels that you wrote. I'm just wondering, because you wrote those novelizations, was it easier writing an original story, knowing that you were basically commissioned by the Ian Fleming estate?
No. The original novels were much more difficult, and they took a lot longer because the movie novelizations, first of all, you're given the script, you're given the plot and the story and the characters. It's your job to turn the screenplay into prose and flesh it out because just putting it into prose is about 30,000 words too short. So then you've got to, embellish it a little bit and flesh it out. But also, those novelizations, the film novelizations, the time, the deadline, the time that you're given to do them is like about 6 to 8 weeks, period. So you have to churn them out really fast. Whereas I have an entire year to do, I had an entire year to do the 6 original books each. And for those, I would really take about probably 6 to 8 weeks just coming up with the storyline, the plot, and then I would try. I would do an outline, which I actually was required to do. But I am a plotter as opposed to a pantser. You know that term,
right? Absolutely,
a plotter or a pantser. I've always been a plotter, and so that was fine with me because I like to map out the story with all the twists and turns and the red herrings and whatever, and I want to know how it's going to end and everything so I can work toward that goal. But then, I would also travel to the locations and do nitty gritty research, walk in Bond's footsteps, stay in his hotels, eat his food, and see all the sites that I'm writing about. And then I'd come back and, write the book, and then it would go through revisions, and, then it'd go to the publishers and go through more revisions and stuff like that. So the whole process was a lot longer and a lot more involved than the movie novelizations.
Well, the reason why I asked the question is not from the sense that it would be easier. I'm just saying, because you had written the novelizations and you had gotten into the Bond vernacular, was it then less pressure, I guess, is what I'm saying? Because to me, I would find it daunting if the Ian Fleming publications or the estate came to me and said, you're going to write an original Bond, and never having done one, it would be more daunting, I would think, than having done at least the novelizations to get your toe wet in the Bond pond, so to speak.
Well, I wrote 0 - 10 first. And then came, I had already begun The Facts of Death, which was the second book. I was already working on that and had actually already done the research trip for that when I got the job to do Tomorrow Never Dies, the movie novelization. So I had to put Facts of Death aside and do Tomorrow Never Dies and finish that and then go back to Facts of Death. So that's what happened there. So I had already written a book and a half of the original stuff before I did the novelization. So it just, going into the novelization, it was just smooth. It was just basically figuring out how am I going to put into prose some of this visual stuff that is in the screenplay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Were there a lot of restrictions from the estate when it came to writing an original James Bond book? Were there things you just absolutely could not do?
No, there were not really any restrictions. They knew that I knew the universe very well. But, I had written that nonfiction book in the 1980s called The James Bond Bedside Companion.
Which I have, by the way.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, it's, I had met the people behind Ian Fleming Publications in the 80s when I was researching that. I'd gone to England and we stayed in touch, and they liked the book when it came out. And we stayed in touch while John Gardner was writing the books. And so when he decided to stop, that's when they approached me to do it. So they knew I knew the Bond character and, the existing books inside and out. And they had seen that I had been writing fiction in the computer gaming world, writing complicated, fantastical plots and dialogue and characters, and doing that for many years. And I had written a first novel, which the chairman of Ian Fleming Publications had read, so he could see that I could start a novel and finish one. So I was offered the job, and that was great. But we did talk about, what direction would we go? Would we stay contemporary, just in the late 90s when I was writing, or would we go back in time to the 1950s or 1960s? What should we do? And it was ultimately, we decided we would stay in sync with the movies because GoldenEye had become such a big hit at the time. So they said, be faithful to Fleming's spirit. You don't have to write like Ian Fleming. We don't want you to write like Ian Fleming. That's not the modern way of writing thrillers now. But stay true to his spirit and try to blend elements of the film series with the literary Bond. And I said, well, that's fine. But I want to keep the character, the Fleming character. I want him to have all of his vices intact. I want him to smoke and drink and womanize and all that stuff. But yeah, when you read my books, there is a feeling that you can sense the Eon production movies in there somewhere, little tastes, a sensibility about it. But there's also the overwhelming, I think, Fleming influence of the character himself and the way the books are structured and the kinds of plots that I would come up with.
Okay, I've got two last questions that I want to put out here. And one is, of the Ian Fleming books, is there one that's your favorite? And question number two is your 6 books. 0 minus 10, The Facts of Death, High Time to Kill, Double Shot, Never Dream of Dying, The Man with the Red Tattoo. Of your 6 books, which one do you think would make the better movie?
Oh my gosh. Well, my favorite Fleming novel is From Russia with Love, although it's probably not the one I would tell a newbie to read first, because it ends with a cliffhanger. You know, if somebody said, I'm only going to read one Ian Fleming book, which one should I read? I'd say Dr. No. As far as my books, oh my gosh, I think all 6 would be good movies. uh, um, you know, they're all like children. I love all 6. If I was really forced to pick one, I would say High Time to Kill, because, you know, there's mountain climbing in that one, and they've never done that. So.
Well, congratulations on the 6 being re-released, and the books are the James Bond, the Raymond Benson Years, or James Bond, rather, the Raymond Benson Years. And Raymond, thank you very, very much for being on the program with us once again. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me on.
Raymond Benson, author of James Bond, The Raymond Benson Years. You can go to my website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0759, and you'll find links to Raymond's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. This broadcast is coming to you from upstairs. Get out of the house.
And still to come on the program, we will talk about Montreal's iconic St. Patrick's Day Parade. Plus, Stuart Nulman is in with another edition of Book Banter. We have more Stuff File news and also an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on. Let's get back to the news right now. It was just another day at California's Venice Beach as 2 women, one fully clothed, the other butt naked, battled it on the boardwalk. Oh, I'm going to need the appropriate battle music to tell this story. There we go. A new nightmare took place last week in broad daylight after the woman had gone on a bit of a tear, attacking people at the popular tourist area until she met her match. While others managed to avoid the woman or filmed her antics from afar, another woman in a black tank top and leggings was ready to throw down. As onlookers filmed or scampered by, the woman wielded what appeared to be a club with spikes on the end and approached her naked opponent saying, "Let's go." The armed woman swung the weapon in the naked lady's direction as the two taunted each other. The woman in leggings threw the club in the direction of the nude and lewd combatant, who picked it up and started running at her opponent and others on the boardwalk. The clothed woman, however, grabbed another club-like weapon, and the two faced off in a bizarre duel. The naked woman, again, was not to be underestimated as she disarmed her rival, grabbing the second baton. Now wielding 2 clubs, the nude fighter pursued the woman, who had walked away at that point, before deciding to stop while she was ahead. The naked woman is seen picking up her clothes, which were strewn across the boardwalk. The incident went on for about 6 minutes, in which others were accosted and threatened by the naked lady. It is unclear if any charges were laid. Well, this could be a new television series. Naked and Unafraid. Dozens of self-serve gas pumps across New Zealand were out of service for several hours due to a leap year-related software issue. They could not process card payments because their computer systems were not programmed to accept February 29th as a valid date. Said Julian Lays, a spokesperson for Gull, New Zealand, motorists had been turning up and unable to get fuel. It's been incredibly frustrating for our customers. All New Zealand self-service gas stations use technology provider Invenco. Payments were still able to be processed at gas stations where employees were present, but some stations said customers had to go inside rather than paying at the pump. John Scott, the chief executive at Invenco, said the company operates pumps in over 100 countries, but only New Zealand was affected by the issue. We clearly know about leap years, Scott said. We've been dealing with them for the last 20 to 30 years. Or, I guess you can say in leap year parlance, 4 to 6 years. He said the issue resulted from a specific software update from the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. He said the system was back online at around 7 p.m. What I'm hearing is that COVID is still causing problems. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, an Argentinian man got the shock of his life after undergoing what he thought was surgery on his gallbladder, only to learn later that the doctors had performed a vasectomy instead. 41-year-old Jorge Baceto went to the Florencio Diaz Provincial Hospital in Cordoba, Argentina, for a gallbladder surgery. The operation was scheduled for February 28th, but due to circumstances out of his control, Jorge's procedure was postponed until the next day. That is apparently the small detail that caused a viral malpractice scandal that has engulfed the whole country. On the day of the surgery, hospital staff came into his room, laid him on a stretcher, and without asking him a single thing or even checking his chart, they took him to the operating room. The doctors didn't bother checking his chart either, so they just performed the type of surgery they had scheduled for the day, a vasectomy. When Jorge woke up, he had no idea what happened, but then a doctor came in to check on him, and after looking at his chart, he gave him the shocking news. He had undergone a vasectomy instead of the scheduled gallbladder operation. Baceto was speechless for a few moments. Then he began to panic, but he didn't have much time for that, as he was soon scheduled for the surgery he was supposed to get in the first place. After his second surgery, Baceto wanted to know how the error had occurred and what could be done to reverse the vasectomy. The doctors kept blaming each other for the blunder, and they kept telling him not to be overly dramatic about the entire situation, as he could still conceive children through artificial insemination if he wanted to. Although Baceto is a father of 2 boys, he is in a new relationship, and he had plans to try for a child with his new partner in the future. They obviously would have liked to conceive naturally, but now they only had the option of artificial insemination. The man's lawyer told reporters that the error stemmed from his client's rescheduled surgery. Vasectomies are usually performed on Wednesdays, and the staff at the hospital, including the doctors, just treated Baceto as another vasectomy patient instead of bothering to look at his chart. Wow. Does anybody else see the irony that this hospital schedules all of its vasectomies on Hump Day?
Hump Day!
It's Hump Day.
Hump Day!
Anyway, let's get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? We've had Alan Hustak on the program before. He's a veteran Canadian journalist, author, and broadcaster. We spoke to him a couple of years ago about the monarchy, and before that, we had him on a little over a decade ago to mark the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic with his book, Titanic, The Canadian Story. Well, he's back again to talk about his upcoming book. This one is called One Long Line of Marvel, 200 Years of Montreal's St. Patrick's Parade. Alan joins us via Zoom from Saskatchewan. Hi, Alan.
Hey, Peter. It's always good to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you, too. This is an interesting book. I mean, first of all, you're now in Saskatchewan. You've obviously spent many, many years here in Montreal. But what made you write this book now? And I ask that question because there is a prominence to the St. Patrick's Day parade here in Montreal. There are parades everywhere, but Montreal's is kind of unique.
Oh, you got that right. You asked me what made me write this book or why I decided to write the book. I have to tell you that this book has kind of come together through osmosis. In 2009, I was the chief reviewing officer for the parade. But long before that, I had written a history of St. Patrick's Basilica. And over the years, I was sort of surrounded with the Irish presence in Montreal. After I walked in the parade as the chief reviewing officer, I was curious. And a lot of the research that I had done on a number of other projects just came together. This year, of course, is the 200th anniversary of the parade. And there haven't been 200 parades, by the way, but it is the 200th anniversary. And I just thought, hey, I owe it to the Irish community for having honored me to honor them with this book.
In doing the research for this book, what are some of the little things that you didn't even know, the little nuggets of truth out there that you are sharing with this book?
One of the surprising things when I was doing research is that when you go back to the original parade in 1824, the first 15 years of the parade, the Irish made common cause with French-Canadian patriots. And that underlying connection between French Canadians, French Roman Catholics, Irish Roman Catholics, both groups having, let's say, disdain for the British monarchy, has kept this parade going in various fashion over 200 years. The church took it over after the 1837 rebellion in Quebec. The church took it over and tried to make it a strictly religious procession. However, an underlying theme to the book is that the St. John Baptiste parade, which is for French Canadians, and the St. Patrick's Parade, obviously for Irish Anglo-Canadians, have always kind of, up until about the 1940s, the two groups sort of supported one another. In fact, there's one year that they talked about combining the St. Patrick Parade and the St. John Baptiste Parade.
How often in the years that the parade has taken place, especially during the 20th century and the first part of this century, how many times would you say politics has gotten in the way?
They like to say that they're nonpartisan. And in fact, they are. The organization is nonpartisan. But politicians have used it to further their political ends. In the beginning of the 20th century, of course, it was very much tied to politics in Ireland. After Ireland got its independence, I know almost every political leader in Quebec has managed to walk in the parade. Justin Trudeau has walked in the parade. Brian Mulroney has walked in the parade. I remember one year in particular when Jack Layton walked in the parade. Justin Trudeau was booed. And if you remember that year, Jack Layton swept Quebec with the NDP. So, yeah, it has not been overtly political. But political leaders have used it to further their cause.
Now, of course, this is a very important parade here in Montreal. You have written this book, which I would assume is going to be very successful here in Montreal. What about outside?
One can only hope.
Yeah. What about outside of Montreal? How popular is the legacy of this parade outside of Montreal? And by extension, where do you think your readers are coming from outside of Quebec?
Well, first of all, there are any number of St. Patrick parades in North America. New York, Chicago, Montreal. Curiously, Toronto banned, that's a whole story in the book, Toronto banned the St. Patrick Parade for a number of years when the Orangemen tried to, Orangemen in Montreal, Orangemen being Irish Protestants, wanted to have their own parade, and that was outlawed by the church and by civic authorities. So Toronto banned the St. Patrick's Parade. Montreal banned the Orange Parade. So for many years, the Irish in Toronto came to Montreal for St. Patrick's Day. And Boston, we've had Boston has come up to swell the ranks of Montreal's parade. But underlying all of this, it still has Quebecois roots. I was surprised to discover, I mean, you asked earlier why I wrote the book. Many years ago when I worked at the Gazette, I ran into a guy called Rafferty, and Mr. Rafferty's ancestors came from Ireland, and he brought with him dirt from Ireland to be put in the cemetery so when he died, he would be buried in Irish soil. Now, 100 years after that, I ran into this man called Rafferty who couldn't speak a word of English, yet he was defiantly and fiercely Irish. He said, it doesn't matter what language you speak. When you're Irish, you're Irish. And the parade, incidentally, has had a black parade queen who had Irish descent. It has allowed gay pride people to walk in the parade. So it is a multifaceted spring blowout. It is a ritual now. It has lost its religious roots, except for the Green Mass at St. Patrick's and the Mass of Anticipation in Griffintown. But it is now a rite of spring. It embraces everybody.
Well, you almost usurped my next question, and that was, at what point do you feel in its long history did it become less of not necessarily an Irish thing, but a religious thing?
No, it stopped being a religious. Well, the parade itself has stopped being a religious parade about 30, 40 years ago. I think you can trace the beginnings of that decline. 1967, when most Roman Catholics sort of walked out of their churches, that begins the decline of the religious influence of the parade. There hasn't been a bishop. I think no bishop has walked in the parade for about 20 years. And now it has just become a festival. It's Montreal's street festival.
Does that make it different than some of the other traditional St. Patrick's Day parades that you discussed earlier, like New York, Chicago? Or are they morphing into a springtime festival as well?
I think ours is different because of the diversity. For example, New York bans certain groups. Boston has canceled the parade a number of times. Our parade just keeps rolling on and on and on. And, it over the years, each year there is a new element to it, a new ethnic group that takes part. You might ask, why has the St. John Baptist Parade, which once, when I lived in Montreal, was one of the biggest festivals in June, it is now sort of diminished, but the St. Patrick's Parade keeps going on and on and on and on. It is so ingrained in Montreal, and again, that has to do, I think, with the fact that about a third of Quebec's population can trace itself to Ireland. It has Irish roots.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, and yet another fascinating book from you. This one is called One Long Line of Marvel, 200 Years of Montreal's St. Patrick's Parade. Once again, I thank you, Alan, for being a guest on the program.
My pleasure, and I hope we see you at the parade this year.
Veteran Canadian journalist, author, and broadcaster Alan Hustak. He's the author of One Long Line of Marvel, 200 Years of Montreal's St. Patrick's Parade. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com to the program number for this show, which is show number 0759, and you'll find links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
From our studios in Montreal, Canada, and going out to the rest of the world, this is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's time to crack a spine. The Stuff File presents Book Banter with Stuart Nulman. Once again, here's Peter Anthony Holder.
And Stuart Nulman is looking for spies in this, the International Women's Day, which is coming up on the 8th. And also, this entire month is Women's History Month. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Peter, and welcome to the Book Banter. We're going to go back in time, Peter, for this special edition of Book Banter, because this the spy thriller that I'm going to be reviewing has a female protagonist. And a pretty good one, too.
Who is she?
Well, let's set the stage right here.
Okay.
I would do a Rod Serling voice, but there's no Twilight Zone kind of thing here. It's the place, New York City, the year 1939. Her name is Giddy Brodsky, who works as a cigarette girl at a popular Manhattan jazz club, and she has one ambition: to open up her own shop to manufacture and sell her own brand of cosmetic creams and lotions. But when she spots an individual named Ivanov, who is a Cossack responsible for the violent deaths of her sister and brother during a pogrom in her native Russian village 19 years earlier, Giddy becomes the most unlikely spy and hero in service to her adopted country, and that's the premise of this entertaining novel, The Jazz Club Spy. Now, the narrative of this book is from Giddy's point of view as she tries to rise from the trauma of the pogrom she witnessed from her unusual hiding place of inside a dead cow's carcass to make enough money from her jazz club job catering to New York's elite cafe society so she can make a name for herself as an entrepreneur. Now, when she reports Ivanov's presence to Carter Vanderzam, a top-level agent for the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, a.k.a. the INS, who's based on Ellis Island, Giddy is hired by the INS as a key figure to avert an assassination plot against one of Joseph Stalin's senior lieutenants, who's about to visit New York City and get aid from the U.S. as a Second World War is about to erupt in Europe, and Ivanov is one of the plotters. Now, yeah, that's right. So, from the glitz of Midtown Manhattan to the slums of the Lower East Side and the notorious Five Points area to the docks of the New York waterfront, Giddy uses her chutzpah and street smarts and unconventional yet practical intelligence methods to try and get a sense of justice for her family, yet at the same time prevent an international incident that could have tragic consequences. Now, don't touch that dial, Peter, because I want to tell you that Roberta Rich, the author of this book, has crafted an enjoyable historical noir thriller that's filled with plenty of action, intrigue, double crosses, and plot twists, plus an assortment of oddball and seedy characters that makes this novel a curious mix of ingredients that works into a single successful formula, just like one of Giddy's homemade lotions and creams.
It's interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are a lot of period pieces out there as far as books are concerned, especially mysteries. But they usually go back a little further than that. No one's really writing. And would you call this a noir story or not?
Yeah, there's noir elements in it. Definitely. I mean, even if you read the parts, especially with what happens on the New York waterfront, it has that noir essence about it.
Yeah, the reason why I asked the question is, correct me if I'm wrong, there's not a lot of stories that are being written today in that particular time period. There are a lot of stories from that time period or just after that have become very, very popular. But new stories written today of that time period, they seem to be rare. Am I wrong?
No, you're correct. I mean, if there's any books that are written about that period in history, they're not usually, spy thrillers or noir thrillers. They're basically historical novels, and a lot of the crop of mysteries that have female protagonists that you read today take place in the present.
Yes. So, what's Roberta Rich's story? Who is she?
Well, she's a Canadian author. This is her second book, actually. This is her first time doing an historical thriller, actually, and it's her first book gained a lot of critical acclaim, but this one has been doing very well on the New York Times bestseller list also. So I guess people like a little bit of a nice historical twist when it comes to spy thrillers, and especially happening on the eve of the Second World War, where right now, at that time, America was trying to stay out of the war and try not to get involved at all.
Exactly. Yes. So again, the book is called?
It's called The Jazz Club Spy, and it's by Roberta Rich. It's published by Simon & Schuster Canada, and it's $24.99.
And dare I ask, are there other books in this genre that you would recommend?
Well, I'd say if you want, during this month, if you want to read some good mystery or thrillers with female protagonists, may I recommend books by Agatha Christie, especially the Miss Marple mysteries, Kathy Reichs with Temperance Brennan, Patricia Cornwell with Kay Scarpella, and a mystery writer that I just discovered late last year. Her name is Jean Rabe, and I read her first book called The Dead of Winter, and it involves her main character in these books. It's now 6 books out right now. Her name is Piper Blackwell, and she's the sheriff, a newly appointed sheriff of a small New England town. And when I read the first book, it was almost like something out of the Coen brothers' Fargo, but without the yaws in it.
And again, this author's name is?
Roberta Rich. But if you're talking about the one I just...
No, the one you just mentioned.
Her name, Jean Rabe. R-A-B-E.
R-A-B-E. Okay.
Yes.
And her character is Piper Blackwell.
Piper Blackwell.
Well, we've come a long, long way since Nancy Drew.
Oh, definitely. And the author of Nancy Drew was, that was a pen name. That was a pseudonym.
Yes. As was the pen name for the Hardy Boys.
Yes, who was Franklin W. Dixon, who was broadcaster Brian McFarlane's dad.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, this week's book is?
It's called The Jazz Club Spy by Roberta Rich, and it's published by Simon & Schuster Canada, and it's $24.99 in trade paperback.
Excellent. And how can people find you? Should they be hunting for you, either to think that you might be a spy or otherwise?
Well, I'm not a fifth columnist, Peter. I'm a newspaper columnist.
Okay, just checking. Just checking.
Yeah, I understand. But you You won't find me in the docks of New York, late at night, but you'll find me in the pages of the Montreal Times at mtltimes.ca or my blog, Stuart Nulman's grapevine.wordpress.com.
Are you saying that there's never been a spy who's worked for a newspaper?
Maybe there was. It's very possible.
I don't think you should answer that question.
Well, you see, I'm being very neutral about it.
Okay. Stuart, thank you very much for being on the program with us once again.
Yes, and if you excuse me, I have to go do some little skulking right now.
Stuart Nulman with another edition of Book Banter here on the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
The Stuff File.
And we're just about out of racetrack for this edition of the Stuff File program. We do have an Idiot of the Day coming your way in just a matter of moments, but we've got a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you right now. 60-year-old Mitchell Cooper Vest is 6 foot 6 inches tall, weighs 250 pounds, and is known to wear a kilt, which made it easier for Texas business owners to identify him as the man who recently came into their antique stores and shoved various items up his rectum before placing them back on the shelf for display. Police allege that Vest entered several shops in Spring, a Houston suburb, last month and engaged in criminal mischief, a misdemeanor. Specifically, cops say Vest first entered the Antique Gallery of Houston and placed a makeup brush and a restoration hardware piece in his anus before returning the merchandise, valued at $130, to the shelf. Vest then showed up at the Curiosity Shop, which is located inside an antiques mall. The shop's owner, Alicia Osborne, told police that Vest took an antique bottle opener and a tobacco tent can, total value $74, and placed them into his anus under his green skirt kilt, then returned the items to the shelf. In both instances, the merchandise handled by Vest had to be thrown away due to feces on them. After complainants identified Vest via a photo array, he was charged in connection with the vile February 10th incidents. With his wife, Vest owns a $600,000 home in the Woodlands, which is a community close to Springs. I would not touch anything in that house. In Atkinson, New Hampshire, a new business is stirring up controversy. The Diaper Spa is a haven for adults who role-play as children. The spa is open to all diaper-wearing individuals who seek acceptance, respite, and care. The facility is decorated like a nursery with toys and adult-sized cribs. Services range from $200 an hour for virtual play dates to a $1,500 a day experience that pampers the little one inside of you. The owner, Dr. Colleen Ann Murphy, said the community of ABDL, which stands for Adult Baby Diaper Lovers, is vast. Being a part of this community brings comfort and solace, she said, and added that her services do not have a sexual component. Some Atkinson residents are concerned, though. Said Kyla Gallagher, "That is something I will never be willing to expose my kids to." Countered Murphy, people tend to fear anything that they fail to comprehend. Well, judging by the stories that I've read about the service, while I do think that it may be a bit odd and weird, it's not something that's immoral or illegal. I'm assuming that clients are not entering the place dressed like giant toddlers in just a diaper, so I fail to understand why Kayla Gallagher feels the need to even consider exposing her kids to it. I think Gallagher has a rash of diaper concern. Anyway, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
Last week, 21-year-old Connor Litka walked into a Porsche dealership in Louisville, Kentucky, and sought to purchase a car with a $78 million check. When told by employees at Bluegrass Motorsport that they were not going to sell him the vehicle, Litka allegedly walked to the parts department looking for keys. Litka ignored requests to leave the dealership until he got his vehicle. Fearing that something bad was going to happen because of his behavior, a worker called cops, who arrested Litka after he again refused to depart the Porsche dealership. He's been charged with criminal trespassing and disorderly conduct, both misdemeanors. A day before trying to pass the $78 million check, Litka attempted to purchase a vehicle from a nearby Land Rover dealership. He was only carrying a check for $12 million that day. Did he think both dealerships were going to make change? Yeah. Anyway, according to his LinkedIn page, Litka is a business student at Indiana University, where he enrolled in 2021. I'm assuming that he's not an A student. And, gee, do you think he has a check handy to post his bail? I mean, why? Oh, why? Do you think that you can waltz into a high-end car dealership without reference or background checks and expect to hand over a check for $78 million and just walk out with a Porsche? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0759. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestuffile.com. And once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0759. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Post, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSL-LP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZH-LP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Peter is a man who came from very meager beginnings, and he's continued to go downhill from there.